What is up, everybody? Welcome to another Saturday morning college football show here on RotoGrinders. Happy to be with you as usual as we get into the groove of college football season. We are in week 3 now. Conference play is going to start kicking up in earnest. We've got quite a few conference games this week. We'll see even more of the conferences get it rolling next week. We'll start to get some of these weird non-conference matchups off of our plate in terms of DFS, and the slates will become a little more recognizable. You'll start to recognize more of the names, the same guys each and every week. So we'll keep it rolling here this week in week 3. As usual, I am Justin Van Zuiden, STL Cardinals 84. I've got the Gridiron Scholar, John Laub, along with me as well. John, how's it going for you this week?
Oh, it's going great. You know, I heard a lot of people say they don't like the television slate of games, and it might not be the most exciting week. But Justin, when I was sitting down since Thursday night, looking at the slate, looking at the options, I'm really excited because there's a lot of different ways to build lineups, and there's some great value out there. So I'm real excited for today's DFS slate. I also like the games because I'm a football fan, but it's a great DFS slate.
Yeah, I think it is really entertaining. I think there's lots of different talking points with these games, even though, you know, we might not have the top 10 versus top 10 matchups this week. I think the kind of the headline that was going around was that there wasn't a single game with 2 top 25 teams facing each other. It's kind of what's got everybody up in arms, but no shortage of talking points this week. And from a DFS perspective, I think the slate is going to be a really interesting one to break down. So there is some news for us to keep an eye on today, which is a good reminder. If you're checking us out, get on over to the RotoGrinders Discord. You can access that from the homepage or from the college football page over at RotoGrinders, or just type in rotogrinders.com/Discord. Our college football channel is where we keep you up to date with all the injury news throughout the day. And you just have to be a RotoGrinders member. You don't have to be a premium subscriber to get in there. So the big news, I guess, is whether Cam Rising is going to come back today, whether Michael Pratt's going to come back today. The Utah situation is particularly intriguing. If Rising sits again, we've got possible quarterback change at Alabama with Jalen Milroe possibly coming off the bench. Maybe they'll use a rotation, but it sounds like Tyler Buckner might start for Alabama today. So how are you kind of taking in all this quarterback news? This is really where all the injuries and all the uncertainty tends to reside today. Anything in particular you're paying attention to or adjusting based on that?
I think the biggest DFS impact is Johnson quarterbacking at Utah. He's a freshman, but he's come off the bench in the first 2 games of the season, and he has 77 yards rushing, and he has scored in each game. They're playing Weber State today. And I've been looking all over for the last 24 hours, and I've seen some news clips from Utah local television stations, and it has not been confirmed, but most reports report that Johnson's going to play today. So right now, Justin, I have Johnson in my lineups in the super flex position because he's only 4,500, and you get the 100-yard bonus on the ground. So I love this play today as long as he's going to be in the game. And what I'm thinking, if I'm a coach and I think about Winningham, we don't have the Pac-12 schedule yet. Cam Rising is coming off that ACL injury. You're going to beat Weber State, even though they're a pretty good team, actually, Justin, from at their level, right? They get respect and everything. Utah should be the better team and should win. Play Johnson today makes a coaching sense. Cameron Rising's been there for a long time. He's a very good quarterback, knows the system. Yes, I think you should be able to get enough reps in practice before the Pac-12. So I have Johnson. I got a monitor. I think it's a 2:30 or 3 kickoff. I forget the exact time. I have an option that maybe not a quarterback, but another player I could put in if Johnson doesn't start. But I think he's starting. That's the most impactful DFS quarterback play.
Yeah, so that game is at 2:00, and there are let's see, 7 games that start after that. So there is enough. I mean, obviously, as long as you don't have your whole lineup locked in, because there are things you can pivot to, but there's not another $4,500 quarterback you can pivot to.
No.
So you got to make sure you at least have a few spots open, or, one spot where you have an expensive player to where maybe you can make a 2v2 swap or something. If for some reason, the news comes out, say 30 minutes before kickoff, that Rising is going to start or something like that. But like you mentioned, it just doesn't make sense for them to bring him back in this spot against this opponent, get him ready for conference play, and then and just play him then. So I am with you on that, but that is something we need to monitor. Are you messing with the Alabama situation at all? I mean, is Buckner on your radar now, or just, we'll talk about some of the other obviously high-end options that we have today, but where do you stand on the Alabama situation?
So I watched enough Buckner at Notre Dame, and I believe he had one really impressive game. But Buckner, if you go back, if you don't know, he was like a high school superstar, but really hasn't played a lot since his junior year. California, kind of because of COVID, they didn't play high school football. So he hasn't had a lot of game reps since he came on to the Notre Dame college campus, and now he's at Alabama. I think Alabama is going to run the football. They've had problems with the run game. It would make sense to me that they are going to pivot to a ground game, and Buckner can get you some points with his feet. But I'm really worried about the Alabama receivers. Not only are they not very good, Justin, from a fantasy standpoint, and it's kind of weird thinking about how much talent has gone through the Alabama wide receiver pipeline, but there might not even be a real NFL prospect right now on the Alabama roster at receiver. So I'm completely ignoring the Alabama passing game, and I don't have Buckner in any lineups because I just don't see upside. I kind of like the Alabama running backs a little bit more right now.
Yeah, I don't think it's absolutely necessary. There's other options in that price range, a little bit higher, a little bit lower. Other guys that we can get to. So, we've got Buckner with a pretty hot ownership percentage right now. I am a little more tepid on that compared to where the field might be, but do agree on Johnson, assuming he gets the go. So, all right, let's go ahead. Those are the big injury situations. Let's fill around it and talk about these other quarterbacks. I'm going to exclude Milroe for now, since we presume he might not go. And look at these other high-end plays. So we've got Jordan Travis, most expensive quarterback on the slate, but there is some weather concern there. It is pretty breezy in Boston College. Also a look-ahead spot for Florida State. They've got Clemson next week, so maybe Florida State pulls off the gas a little bit in this game, but you are getting Travis at lower ownership. I do think he's interesting for GPPs. You've got DJU in here. You've got Kyle McCord. Jaden Daniels is getting quite a bit of buzz today as well. Where do you stand on kind of the top 5 or 6 quarterbacks?
I have one who I'm heavily rostership in this one, Justin. It's Jaden Daniels. I'm a big fan of Jaden Daniels from a DFS standpoint. He has a nice rushing upside. I think Jaden Daniels had 2 or 3 games at nearly 100 yards last year, if my memory serves me. And there's a good chance he might be able to hit that at any time. He also now has better receivers than I think people realize with Brian Thomas. We might talk about him later, but he's been really good. So now they have Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas at the wide receiver position, and they're not really good. I don't love their backs. They're okay at LSU. So you really have a small funnel of offensive production with the quarterback position. He's basically targeting 2 wide receivers. Also, because their starting tight end is out today, or very questionable. Doesn't look like Mason Taylor. Doesn't look like he's going to play. So you might have this very small tunnel of production in the air, and Daniels can essentially be your star on the ground. I love Daniels in this game, and why I like him even more, Mississippi State should be able to push points on the board and push LSU. So I don't expect Daniels to be taken out of the game. I think you got an opportunity here. He's going to play every snap till the end. I love Daniels in this matchup.
Yeah, I think it's a nice spot too for LSU to kind of put the taste of that Florida State loss, out of their mouths a little bit. Put up some points today and kind of quiet the doubters a little bit. So, like Daniels as well, he is my favorite along with, again, Travis. I think is fine in GPPs. And then the next range of quarterbacks is just kind of meh for me, like Carson Beck, Sam Hartman, Will Howard. I don't think any of them are absolutely necessary today. If I'm in that 8K price range, I'd rather just go up and get one of the top guys or play Daniels at a similar price. And then, until we get down into the 7Ks where it becomes interesting again. So do you have any interest in kind of the rest of this 8K range?
It's interesting when I looked at it and I looked on point per dollar and like how my projections and how the projections on RotoGrinders looked, I avoided them all. And I like Will Howard. He was good last week. We had talked about him on last week's show, but at the 8.2 on the road against Mizzou, I don't have him. I guess he could be an interest in GPP pivot if you wanted to go there, but I don't have any of them in my lineups right now because I agree, Justin, I love once you drop down to like the 7.1 range and below. I think there's some real nice options down there.
Yeah, and as we kind of get down there, I think the first one, or a couple, I guess, that are going to cross people's minds, Davis Brin and Tanner Mordecai. Now, if you would have told me a year ago that a Wisconsin game would have the highest total on a slate, I'd look at you crazy. But you've got two different coaching staffs here. Both Georgia Southern and Wisconsin have brought in new styles over the past year. They're both not necessarily Georgia Southern's throwing the ball a lot. Wisconsin not necessarily throwing it more on a percentage of plays basis, but they're playing a lot faster. So you've got Tanner Mordecai running that offense now. It's been a little hit or miss through the first couple games. You've got Davis Brin on the other side of that game. You've got Riley Leonard in here that is projecting very well today. Those are probably the three options in that kind of $6,600 to $7,500 price point. Brin, Mordecai, Leonard. Do you have one out of that group that you like better than the others?
For cash games, I like Riley Leonard the best. For GBP, I like Davis Brin. And, because you can match him up with that Wisconsin backfield, I think it's a nice comeback. But in cash games, Riley Leonard has massive upside with his legs. And I actually think Duke is a little bit better passing the ball than I expected back in August. Their receivers are okay, and they have a nice backfield that Leonard can dump the ball off. But Leonard against Northwestern, and Northwestern, I don't know if they'll win a game. I mean, they might win 1 or 0 games this year. I think things have just really gone unfortunate for that program right now. And Riley Leonard is gaining NFL buzz. I think this is a spot where Leonard, we have him projected at, 23 points. I think he could push 30 points. So I have Riley Leonard in a couple of my lineups this week because there's 6.7 is nice savings. He's the player that I like most in this group.
Yeah, I think Leonard is a really strong play. I like Davis Brin a lot and Mordecai for GPPs. I mean, you can certainly run some stacks of that game if you want, should it shoot out and Georgia Southern keep it competitive. Austin Reed, probably the one. We've already talked about Nate Johnson. So again, if you're just joining us, assuming Nate Johnson starts for Utah, we got to wait for that confirmation. It's a 2:00 game. If you are planning on playing Nate Johnson, have a contingency plan in place. So the other option, in that sort of similar price range would be Austin Reed for Western Kentucky. That is a 4:00 kickoff. So if you are planning on playing Nate Johnson, and things go south there, you could pivot up to Austin Reed. It'll cost you an extra $1,000. So again, you have another spot you can pivot off of, and then that ends up working out. But your thoughts on Austin Reed or maybe Jack Plummer or anybody else we missed at quarterback here?
I think the Austin Reed, I've been thinking about this game a lot, Justin, because we know Western Kentucky is likely to throw the ball. If they can be productive enough, they might throw the ball 50 times against the Buckeyes today. And I'm kind of hoping that the Western Kentucky can just put enough points on the board in which Ohio State has to keep their studs on the field longer than expected. Austin Reed, we have him projected at 17 points. if we get a little bit of, positive offensive production out of them, I think you can easily smash the 20-point barrier. It's only 5,000. And you know what? You mentioned it. It is a nice flip if you put your high-priced running back in the flex and then you put Johnson in your super flex. You can flip Bryn, and maybe you have to go down. There's a lot of options at running back, and you can make that transition there. So if you're worried about Johnson, I do like Austin Reed, because we know they're going to throw the ball, and in this matchup, they're going to have to throw the ball a lot, I believe, against the Buckeyes.
Totally agree. I think the volume will help make up for maybe a little bit less efficiency, particularly, inevitably when they're trailing, and hopefully they're just not trailing by 50. If they can keep it within a couple scores, then there's some ceiling there for sure. So, all right, let's go ahead and pivot to running back. Interesting options at the top. I don't think there's necessarily a smash play here, but Braylon Allen, Audric Estime, we've seen these teams on a lot of main slates already this year. You've got Travion Henderson, Cody Schrader, kind of rounding out your top tier of running backs today. Who are you liking at the top?
My number one guy is Braylon Allen, and we have him projected at over 40% rostership. So I was hoping earlier in the week that maybe his poor performance might keep people off of him. But I'm still okay with him in cash games. Remember, we're trying to get over 50%. And if 60% don't have him, I'm okay with that. I would think that logical coaching dictates that Braylon Allen, you got to get him moving in the ground game. As the Big Ten schedule comes up, you're going to succeed as long as Braylon Allen is being productive if you're Phil Longo and that offensive coaching staff at Wisconsin. So I think this is a game where you can really get Allen maybe 20 to 25 carries. Last week, didn't he have 6 catches for some, it wasn't very good yardage-wise, but they are throwing him the ball, which is, I'd like to see them get him down the field a little bit more. Maybe you could juke someone to get you a 25-yard run or something like that. So there is positive news of Braylon Allen in the running game. And the reason I pivoted to Allen over Estime is just a little bit of savings. And I'm a little concerned. I don't know if Central Michigan can keep up with Notre Dame. When I look at that Notre Dame offensive line and then I see how efficient Sam Hartman is throwing the football, I just wonder if the Chippewas will be run out of the building today. So that's why I kind of like Allen. I think there'll be a more competitive game between the Badgers, and I think it's the Eagles, right? If I'm right, it's the Eagles.
Yeah. One of those birds anyway. All right. Let's see. I agree on Allen. I mean, I don't like a lot of the other top end running back plays today. So I'm fine with Allen. Schrader, I think, is okay as well if he fits your build. But that is kind of where my interest ends with the high end running backs. And then we kind of get into the 6K range where this could be where I think games are won and lost today, because you've got Marks, you've got Jackson, you've got Benson, you've got Damian Martinez, you've got Singleton. All these guys are getting a little bit of pub today. As far as good mid-range running backs, I think Martinez is my favorite against a SDSU defense that just isn't the same as what it used to be a year or two ago. So I like Damian Martinez in this range. I will toss it to you and just realize that I don't have my computer plugged in and got a battery warning, so I got to grab my charger real quick. But I will be back in 30 seconds, and I'll let you talk about this mid-range of running backs while I grab that.
No problem. I do like Martinez, and we'll talk about the Oregon State running back a little bit later in the show. However, I think the pivot play for GPP is Trey Benson of Florida State. And from what I've seen, I live in the Northeast, and it looks like they're going to have winds between 35 and 40 miles an hour at Boston College. Well, if the wind gets that high, we know historically in the data, there's been people who've done studies. Wind hurts the passing game. I think when you get over 30 miles per hour, I forget there's a kind of a specific number. Well, if that wind is going to be 38 miles an hour in Boston, that tells me that Florida State should want to run the ball a lot against Boston College. And if you look at our ownership right now, from a GPP perspective, you have Marks at over 22%, Jackson at over 39%, Martinez at over 30%. And there's Trey Benson at around 7%. Trey Benson might get 20 to 25 carries in this game. He could also get some quick dump offs. If you want to pivot in a GPP, I do think Florida State's the superior team. So I think it's a great GPP option with the weather. I don't think it's going to rain. From looking at the weather, maybe you get a drizzle, but I don't think the rain bothers me. And the other player I like is Jaquavius Marks. He's been over 30 points the first 2 games of the season. What's interesting, Justin, remember, Mississippi State ran the air raid last year. And Jaquavius Marks was getting like 5 to 7 receptions a game in Mike Leach's system. This year, unfortunately, we know what happened to Marks Leach is no longer with the program. They've switched the entire scheme of the offense. They're pounding the ball this year. Jaquavius Marks has become an unbelievable football player running the ball. I think he's got over 100 yards in each game, produced over 30 fantasy points in each game. And what if LSU jumps on top of them? Well, Marks is still a good pass catcher. We've known that for his first 2 years. I really love Marks in this week's lineups too, my friend.
Yeah, I like Marks as well. I think you laid out a good point there. I mentioned Martinez kind of being my favorite, and the Benson. I think as the week has gone along with that weather forecast coming into play, I think Benson is certainly more interesting. I did bet Boston College plus the points today, so I think just with Florida State, remember it's going to be windy. Boston College isn't very good, but it's going to be windy. Maybe a little drizzle, and Florida State has Clemson next week. So Florida State gets out to a comfortable lead. They're not going to want Travis running around, throwing the ball 40 times. I think they'll take the foot off the gas a little bit. And Benson is a guy I've kind of come around on as the week has gone along. Let's see. Anybody else in kind of this middle range? There's been a lot of talk on what to do with the Penn State backfield with Singleton and Katron Allen, both kind of splitting touches. They're both pretty affordable. You've got Jawar Jordan. Let's see. And then there's probably not much until we get all the way down to Mekhi Hughes at 4,600. Any of those guys strike you or other value running backs today?
I'll be honest, I've been avoiding the Penn State backfield in DFS. Now I have them in my season-long leagues because you never know when like last week, Singleton had 3 touchdowns. So it could happen at any time. But it's so hard to predict, right? Plus, they got Drew Allar, who's actually playing pretty good at quarterback this year. So I think they spread the ball around too much in the backfield. I guess you could do a GPP with both backs, but that's not usually how I form a GPP. So I don't like them in cash games because I think either one of them could pop at any time. You didn't mention Jordan of Louisville. I think he's very interesting because what is he, like 5.7? I forgot what the salary on him was. Let me go down here.
I think it's in that. I got it. Here it is, 5,500.
5,500. We have pretty low ownership on him expected. Now, he's kind of a conundrum because you're betting on efficiency. Justin, he's had very few carries in the first 2 games. I think he's had less than 10 in each game. But, man, I think he's averaging over 8 yards a carry. He's scoring touchdowns. He's pretty good in the passing game. So as long as you're comfortable with a player who's highly efficient right now, I do like Jordan. He's a very sneaky flex option for me in a couple lineups. I'm not heavily rostering him, but I do like him as a pivot play.
Yeah, let's see. I'm sorting by our ownership here for other guys we may have mentioned. I think Hughes is a great value. Cam Porter Cam Porter getting some ownership. I'm not playing Northwestern. I don't trust that team. Bankston for Washington State at the Stone minimum 3K. Sometimes that has some value on DraftKings. Those are just some of the guys that are popping in our ownership. Hughes is certainly the guy we like the best. Anybody else at running back that you want to touch on?
I like Hughes a lot. He's in my lineups this week. He is the best back in Georgia Tech. I hope they keep the game close enough, but I don't think there's anyone I put into a lineup that's less than Hughes right now salary. And I know people do like the $3,000 running backs, but Justin, over 7 or 8 years I've been playing college DFS, it's too risky for me with the three. I'd rather go with the $3,000 receiver in my book than a $3,000 running back, because sometimes they're just in committees and you just never know how many touches they're going to get.
Yeah, I agree. I'll sprinkle them in some tournament lineups.
Okay.
But at 3K, but I prefer going cheaper at wide receiver as well. So let's go ahead and pivot there. Again, the two most expensive wide receivers are the Ohio State guys. Let's just talk about that here first at the wide receiver position. Does Western Kentucky keep this competitive enough to keep Harrison and Egbuka on the field? Do we like them? Are we worried about a blowout? How are you handling the Buckeye receivers today?
I do think it's worth having one of the two. So I do think we have to look at it. I'm looking at grades and potential NFL prospects right now. Ohio State isn't as strong in the back end, Justin, as they have been. I mean, historically, Ohio State's pretty good in the secondary. But if you look at the roster right now, I'm not overly impressed with their safeties or their cornerbacks. And the reason, because I had to dig deep, can Western Kentucky keep this game close? And what I came to the conclusion was there is an opportunity if they get the ball out of Austin Reed's hands quick enough, which they do. If you've watched the Hilltoppers, they can get the ball out quickly in that offense. I do think they can make enough plays because I'm not overly scared of the Buckeye secondary. Now, we have a small sample size. I think you mentioned it earlier, right? 2 weeks. But from what I'm looking at on grades of Ohio State, what I hear from draft prospect lists, they're not great. So I think Western Kentucky can keep Egbuka and Harrison on the field, right? That's what we want. I want at least 3/4 of football out of those two players.
Yeah, and I think I am with you. I think Western Kentucky can score enough to make that happen. You should have enough salary available. There's plenty of value here at the wide receiver position. There may be not as many punts at the running back position, but there are certainly, some mid-range plays to consider. So, I'm with you. I am targeting maybe one of the Ohio State receivers in a good chunk of my lineups as well. But if you can't fit them, you can just go down to Malik Neighbors at 7,300. We both like that LSU offense today. I presume that you're fine with Neighbors as well.
Oh, absolutely. I do like Neighbors. And I do believe that Neighbors is due for a bust-out game. He's been good, right? But he's not been unbelievable yet. He does have in his repertoire that he can hit a 75-yard touchdown at any time. He did it, I believe, in the bowl game last year. So he's got big home run ability. And maybe if the Bulldogs focus on his teammate, who we might talk about pretty soon, maybe Neighbors gets the benefit of the better coverage. So that might make it a little bit more optimal for him. I do like Daniels and Neighbors if you want to stack the LSU passing game very much. I think Neighbors is the sneaky play here.
Yeah, I like him a lot. He's one of my favorite wide receivers on the slate today. And I think, if you're in this range, go ahead and get up to Neighbors, get up to Egbuka. And then, Brian Thomas, who you're kind of just hinting at there as well. We are all kind of on the same page here of not loving the Alabama receivers with the potential switch at quarterback today. But there's just not a whole lot in this other kind of, I'm lower on Coleman now with the weather there. So there's not a whole lot else in this kind of $6,500 to $7,300 range. But Thomas for LSU, I presume, is the other guy you were mentioning there.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to go Thomas over Neighbors, I'm okay with that, because I think Thomas, he's blown me away with how well he's played. I did not expect that over the summer. He's taken his game up to the next level. Thomas has been very good this year.
Yeah, and then anything else? I mean, until we get down to around that 6K mark, I'll just give you the floor kind of with some of the guys in this middle range. There's a lot of guys in this kind of 55, 58, $5,900 range. Who do you want to highlight in there?
Well, I don't like that 6 like I wanted. Coleman, I was interested in, but with the win, I'm totally off of him. If you don't know, it looks like Johnny Wilson of Florida State is very questionable. It doesn't look like which also drives me towards Benson a little bit more if Johnny Wilson isn't in the game. The only guy who might be interesting as a total pivot is Lambert Smith of Penn State. He's clearly their best receiver. And if you want to go away from the Penn State running game, if you want to think about the Penn State passing game, Lambert Smith is an interesting option. We have him projected at 13 fantasy points. I think he could go over that if he hits the 100-yard barrier. So those he would right now be the only guy. I don't like the Notre Dame passing game right now. I was interested to look if Michael Pratt doesn't play. I don't really want their wide receivers. So I'm basically out in general in this area, other than Lambert Smith.
I don't love that area either, because then you can get down and get some options here in this next range. So we've got we talked about Georgia Southern and Wisconsin already. So you've got Burgess in here. Just all sorts of receivers in this range that are there's Hood as well. You've got Jamari Thrash for Louisville. You've got Burden for Missouri. I mean, all these guys getting a little bit of love today. You got a favorite out of that group of the Georgia State or Georgia Southern guys. I think I said Georgia State earlier, but Georgia Southern guys, Burden, Thrash. Who you like in there?
If you want to go Georgia State, if you want to go Bryn, and you believe that they can, that they'll push Wisconsin, Burgess is my favorite option. I think he's the better. There's Caleb Hood, but I do believe Burgess is the better of the two options for Georgia Southern there. So I go him. My favorite play in the group, though, is Luther Burden of Mizzou against Kansas State at home. I like this. Burden has been peppered with targets this year. They've moved him around. Now, I think he was the first 5-star receiver at Missouri last year. He had a nice season for the Tigers, but he had a very low ADOT. But I had spoke to people. He was a true freshman. I don't expect him to be getting down the field necessarily 20, 30 yards. His ADOT is up. His usage is up. They're moving him around the formation. He's more into the slot position. I think he had 12 targets last week, Burden. So I'm very much into him. He's under the 6,000. He's 5.9. We have him projected at almost 16 points and only 10% rostership. I really love Burden there. And I'm not, I'm trying to think. Antoine Wells is playing, but I don't like the matchup against Georgia, so I'm not going there. And there's no one else until we basically get down to the low 5K that I'm really interested in, Justin.
Yeah, the cops are coming to get you there, so we'll have we gotta get through the content here before the cops raid into John's house. I agree. I don't think there's a whole lot else above 5,000. I'll go ahead and sort by ownership because we just get to so many names once we get down to the bottom. So the other guys. We've talked about this Western Kentucky offense throughout the show. Their number one receiver is Malachi Corley. He's 4,700. You've got the obvious misprice of the week on Brock Bowers. So DraftKings initially released the slate with Bowers at 3K. They pulled it back and re-released the slate with Bowers at 4,700, which isn't, it's better, I guess, but still really cheap. So do you have a preference between Bowers and Corley? That's probably a question that a lot of people might have.
I'm going with Bowers. Corley didn't play last week. He went off the field. He went off the field the opening week of the year, and I think the coaching staff decided to rest him last week. I mean, I've heard that he might have been able to play. I'm sure if it was a conference game or a difference-making game for the Hilltoppers, he would have been in there. I do think they saved his health for today against Ohio State. My concern is, are they just going to take Corley out and force, Austin Reed to go other places? So at the end of the day, Bowers is the number one option in the Bulldogs offense for Georgia. And I know he hasn't played well. I think he only had one catch last week. I had him in my season-long leagues. It was not pretty last week. But Bowers is explosive. I know there are some people who are saying, and you probably would fade him in GPP. I don't think, because he's going to have high ownership. But in cash games, Bowers' ceiling and his explosiveness, especially coming off of a bad day, I have him in all my lineups this week. I just think the value is too much there. And I made one mistake. One receiver I think I didn't talk about because I did not see him on my screen. Jamari Thrash, I think he's in a smash spot. He's by far the number one receiver for Louisville. If you don't like Jawar Jordan, go with Jamari Thrash. He's 5.3K.
Yeah, he's fine as well. He's going to be one of the more popular options today. So totally agree on that. Let's see. Anybody else that we've missed at receiver? Jalen Calhoun. Are you any interest in pairing Calhoun with Riley Leonard at all today?
I am okay with that because I do think Calhoun is the best receiver on Duke. And I don't think he's going to be – I don't have his rostership in front of me right now. I think I would assume he's pretty low ownership, but I could be – you never know sometimes when you look for ownership. I'm okay with that. We
got him at 12.
That's not that bad, actually, if you're going to look for the Duke passing game, because I do think Riley's going to be good today. So I think Calhoun could bust out in a big game. I like Calhoun. He's a good play. Interesting play this week.
Yeah. Anybody else at wide receiver that you have on your mind that we've missed, haven't talked about? The floor is yours if we've missed anybody.
There's only one guy I think who's interesting from a GPP standpoint. I would not put him in my cash game. But Xavier Leggett of South Carolina, with Antoine Wells having not played early in the season, Leggett has really, really come on for Spencer Rattler in that passing game. Now, I know it's a tough matchup, but we might just get garbage time production because it looks like South Carolina is going to be playing from behind against Georgia. So we might get a lot of fourth quarter production from Xavier Leggett. And hey, who knows? Maybe South Carolina pushes Georgia. I don't expect it. But Leggett is a very interesting pivot, and he looks like he has low ownership.
All right. I don't mind that call myself. Well, let us, again, if you're just joining us, if you're saying, well, who do you like at quarterback? Who do you like at running back? Who are the guys I have to have today? We always do a little recap at this point. John has his fantastic 4 plays of the week that he likes over on DraftKings. So I'll throw it to you, John. Who are your fantastic 4 options for this week?
At running back, I'm going to go Damian Martinez of Oregon State. We had talked about him earlier in the show. It is just a great, great smash spot for him. If you don't know, he's a sophomore running back, over 200 pounds. He is just powerful. My only concern is if DJU sneaks in 2 or 3, touchdowns from like inside the 5. But I do think Martinez in a great opportunity here to get 2 touchdowns with well over 100 yards rushing. So I love him. We talked about Jamari Thrash. I have him in my fantastic 4 this week. We have 40% ownership projected, but he has been incredible. He came from Georgia State to Louisville. Louisville brought in, a whole new scheme. They're throwing the ball all over the field. I like Jack Plummer, their quarterback. Thrash is the star. So plug in Martinez and Thrash. I'm going with Bowers in my fantastic 4. I just think, the ceiling is too high. I would be shocked if Bowers had another unproductive day. The coaching staff has talked about this. How do we get our best player involved in the passing game? And I just think the Gamecocks are good enough where they're going to put up like 21 points, which will force Georgia to throw. And right now, I'm putting Nate Johnson in my fantastic 4. The upside with his legs is too good, but we discussed it earlier in the show. You have to be prepared for a pivot play. Johnson in my super flex. So my fantastic 4, plug him into the RotoGrinders optimizer. It's great. You can get up to 25 lineups built. Put in Johnson, Martinez, Thrash, and Bowers, and see what our optimizer tells you. But that's my Fantastic Four this week in the main slate on DFS or on DraftKings.
All right, good stuff. And then again, keep in mind you can check out the RotoGrinders college football channel and Discord. It's already got quite a bit of chatter this morning. If you are wanting to keep an eye on that injury news, perhaps with Nate Johnson, with the Alabama quarterback situation, check that out throughout the day. We'll keep you informed over there. What we like to do here at the close of the show is just touch on FanDuel for a little bit. I see some people in the Discord asking about Buckner on FanDuel because he's only 6,500 over there. I think he's certainly a little bit more viable on FanDuel because of that salary tag. Helps, basically get whoever else you want into your FanDuel lineups today. And what I will do is just highlight kind of the later games that are not also part of the DraftKings slate. So many of these are games that'll be on the night slate for DK, and they are on the main slate for FanDuel. So I will just highlight those. Of course, Michael Penix for that suddenly explosive Washington offense is getting a lot of buzz. I see some chatter in the Discord about Donovan Smith. You've got a rushing upside quarterback in Garrett Schrader that I think is really interesting tonight. He's one of my favorite quarterbacks on the FanDuel slate. What are you looking at over on FanDuel today?
I think the Houston TCU game is unbelievably fascinating. Houston can't play defense. They're not very good on the defensive side. And I do believe Chad Morris and that offense for TCU. So I'm not at all against putting Donovan Smith and Chad Morris into your lineups this week, because I do think that has a really potential to be a great shootout game. I do like Buckner on FanDuel. I don't like him on DraftKings, but you just mentioned it, the salary. There's such a difference, and it's a massive savings for Buckner. Now, we would hope if you're going to go with Buckner, I think you have to be comfortable with him throwing. He might throw for less than 200 yards, Justin. However, he could get 60 to 70 yards receiving with the rushing score. So as long as you understand that I'm not likely to get over 220 yards throwing from Buckner this week. And I don't, the other challenges, I like to pair up my quarterback with the receiver. In general, I try to do that as often as possible. It's very hard in the Alabama passing game to choose any receiver to go with Buckner. But I think he's a very nice salary savings play there. But if you don't like Penix, and I think Penix in my book is the top end star on FanDuel here. He's just been so good, right? He's just one of the best quarterbacks in college football right now. If you don't go with Penix, you could go to Jonathan Smith or Chad Morris in that other game.
All right. So yeah, I like, you can get one of those high-end quarterbacks in there on FanDuel. Penix, Chandler Morris, Donovan Smith. I think all those guys are fine. Again, I like Schrader a good bit in GPPs as well. The running back pool on FanDuel isn't quite as strong as what you have on DraftKings because you don't have some of those guys like Braylon Allen, Damian Martinez not on the FanDuel slate. And these guys that we're kind of adding in on FanDuel in the later games, there's not a whole lot there. Devin Maccabee and Imani Bailey. We already talked about that TCU game. Those are the only two that really project as upside guys. If we start to look at wide receivers, obviously you compare McMillan or Odunze with Penix. Ricky Pearsall's a guy I like. Deion Burks was a chalky play last week that isn't going to get near as much ownership this week. The Tennessee wide receivers are still really cheap. We talked about them a couple weeks ago. Squirrel White is cheap on the DraftKings night slate. He's only, I just lost him. He's really cheap on FanDuel too. 5,700 on FanDuel on the main slate. So who are some of your wide receiver running back picks that you like on FanDuel? And then we'll wrap it up here.
If you're going to FanDuel, and if I do like this Houston game, there are two wide receivers for the Cougars. There's Samuel Brown and there's Matthew Golden. Now, if you look at the breakdown, Matthew Golden is scoring his points on touchdowns. He is the one who's finding the end zone. However, The more highly targeted, the actual productive receiver is Samuel Brown in the Cougars passing game. He just doesn't have the touchdown equity through the first 2 games of the season. Now, we know, Justin, touchdowns can be fickle, right? What if Samuel Brown, who's getting more targets, he's more productive, if he can get one of these touchdowns that I project from Donovan Smith today, I really like Samuel Brown a ton. You could go with Golden. There's nothing wrong with that by any stretch of the imagination. But I'm kind of into pivoting here. And we have, oh, wow. Okay, so we have higher projected than I thought. We have them at nearly 30%. So people are on them. And now Golden is at 13%. I didn't realize the roster shift. So I happen to like Brown myself. I'm very much into him. Another wide receiver who's interesting. If you haven't been watching Arkansas, I don't have Raheem Sanders, their running back. Andrew Armstrong has been their most productive wide receiver for the Razorbacks. He's under 8K. They play BYU. We have him projected at 3% rostership. I like Andrew Armstrong in this game. Another wide receiver, because I don't think he was on our day slate. Ricky Pearsall of Florida. Tennessee should put up points. If Joe plays, okay, let's just get a decent game from Joe Milton. As long as Tennessee's putting up points, that will force Florida to the air. If you have not been watching the Gators, Ricky Pearsall's been very good. He scored over 20 points in a PPR format. I haven't looked at what he is in a non-P. We're a half point, right? On FanDuel. I'm sorry, my memory. I think it's a half point PPR.
Yeah, it is.
So in a full PPR, he's over 20. He's probably close to it in a half point PPR. I do like Ricky Pearsall a ton on FanDuel. Running back. I'm shocked by this. If you're looking for a complete pivot play, Omarion Hampton had over 200 yards for the North Carolina Tar Heels. It's a semi-tough matchup against Minnesota, but we have them at less than 1% rostership. Trey Benson at 19, Jaquavius Marks at 11, Amani Bailey and Jace McClellan at over 20 and 27 points. Hampton's upside, if British Brooks does not play, and I wonder if they're even going to just give the ball to Moore, even if British give Hampton the ball more, even if Brooks is out. I love Hampton in this game this week. I'm surprised for a player who's gotten over 200 yards. He's being overlooked, but I like Hampton a ton. And the last one, if you haven't watched him, Darius Taylor. He's a freshman at Minnesota. Justin, he's basically their offense. I mean, he exploded last week out of the gate for the Golden Gophers. And we know if you've watched Minnesota last couple of years with Muhammad in the backfield, they feed their running back. I like Darius Taylor. He's only 7.8K. I like him in this matchup.
As do I. I tagged him in our lineup HQ tool here. Really low ownership there. We know the UNC defense, they're maybe a little better this year, but had trouble stopping App State. I like that call, and I think that game could be a sneaky one to target on the FanDuel slate. I have tried to catch up with some of the questions that we've gotten in the YouTube throughout the show. The most important one does not affect this main slate, does affect the night slate tonight. So I want to pass it along in case some of you are going out for the day or you're not going to be around. Quinshon Judkins has been updated to doubtful for tonight. So it sounds like he is not going to play. So that, we'll have to, I haven't analyzed that yet to see, what else can we maybe target from Ole Miss in his absence. We'll definitely do that. We'll get our projections updated. But just make sure you are not planning to play him because he was going to be one of the more popular options on the night slate tonight. Aaron Lindsay in the YouTube chat wants to know, John, if you are from Northern Jersey because your accent sounds like it.
I'm not far from Northern New Jersey, but I am in Connecticut, which is just straight up 95. So I didn't know, but no, I'm not.
We had a whole big discussion on here during one of the baseball shows the other day about whether we had anybody viewing from Wyoming. and we did not get any takers. So nobody was viewing from Wyoming on that particular show, but we'll see. One of these shows will get a Wyoming viewer. But the geography has come into question on the shows this week. Marcus also wants to know, how likely is Johnson to be the starting QB today? We think so they are close to the vest with the news. Obviously, we think it makes sense given the opponent that he is likely to start, and they shouldn't rush Cam Rising back unless they maybe want to get him a few reps. But we don't know that for sure. And that game is a middle afternoon game, so just make sure you're keeping an eye on it. And then Josh also wants to know if you have any interest in a 3K John Emery Jr. for LSU. Any interest in 3K John Emery Jr. today?
I would not have the guts to put him in a cash game lineup. I understand while there's some interest in him, I could see it as a GPP pivot. If you maybe he gets 2 rushing touchdowns, but Justin, if he doesn't get 2 rushing touchdowns, I don't know how many fantasy points he would put up. And I'd be reluctant with Jaden Daniels because those rushing quarterbacks can steal all of the goal line carries for a team. So I would be very reluctant, but he is a really interesting pivot in a GPP lineup.
All right. With that, we will put a bow on the show for today and get ready to finalize our lineups as well. Thanks to John for joining me. Thanks to Devin for working hard on the weekend and producing behind the scenes for us. We hope you enjoyed the show. Again, check out the RotoGrinders Discord. We'll keep you up to date on all the news. Seems like it might be a little fast and furious today. So enjoy your week, everybody. We'll be back here next weekend, same time, same place. Again, for John and our producer, Devin, I am Justin. Enjoy your weekend, everybody. We'll catch you later.